What's shakin' bacons? I think it's gonna be time for our Deadpool 2 spoilers discussion. Don't mind me. I love that silly X-Force rap by Team Headkick. I can't get over it. Actually, as I was thinking about everything I wanted to talk about for this review, I was just kind of grooving to it, you know what I'm saying? I was just kind of like, oh, yeah, X-Force. I was like, oh, I'm going to let everyone else enjoy it as well. So if you have not yet seen my non-spoilers review, go ahead and watch it, because I'm not going to talk about why I gave it the rating that I did with my movie rating scale. That's what that review is for. Granted, I don't talk about any of the spoilers, but I give you a full breakdown of my overall thoughts and impressions of Deadpool 2. This video is going to be focused on diving into spoilers and more story-centric plot lines and things like that. And thanks to how well the trailers were edited, that means that the spoilers, since they were woven throughout the movie, are a pretty big discussion, and it's time to talk about it. So the big intended shock point, I think, for the Deadpool 2 story is that Cable, of course, is not actually a villain, and Vanessa dies, and this triggers Wade Wilson's downward slide, and this downward slide and him attempting to kill himself and end his own existence to reunite with Vanessa really encourages him to help this mutant kid who is Fire Fist, and then he goes on this journey of self-discovery, and he helps Fire Fist go on a journey of self-discovery. Everyone is full of self-discovery in this movie. The problem is, because the story is so predictable, it really detracts from the impact, because you see exactly where the story is going. So as soon as he attempts to kill himself in the beginning of the movie, I knew immediately Vanessa was dead, and I have to assume that the writers would know that this was going to be recognized by the audience, because they immediately lead into it, and you kind of get on board with what's happening. That meant for me, like right off the bat, that I knew as I was sitting in the theater that I would have the same problem with this movie that I did with the first one. And this is a problem that honestly I was really hoping I wouldn't have. The issue I had with the first one is that it was just so predictable and formulaic for me. And I was able to guess with this one as well every kind of plot twist and turn that the story took. And part of this is because my bachelor's degree is in English literature, so I am trained, and I paid thousands of dollars to learn how to be trained in guessing and assessing how storylines will go. So this may not be an issue that anyone else had with this movie, but for me personally, the story was just predictable. I knew there would be a redemptive moment for Deadpool and for this kid. I knew that Colossus wasn't going to give up on Deadpool. I mean, I think we all kind of knew that though, right? Right. I knew Colossus would show up at the end battle, although quick side note, I really loved the Colossus end battle. And another quick side note, I should say, I really like Deadpool and Colossus interactions. Love it. And I love that Vanessa in the afterlife acknowledged it. But that's an aside. I figured Cable wouldn't truly be the bad guy because, I mean, first of all, Cable, per the comics, per Marvel's universe, is actually a leader of the X-Force. And while they're not as pacifist or as gentle, I guess you could say, as the X-Men, you know, the X-Force believes in more militant, forceful action. Cable is not an actual bad guy. So I'm glad that Cable wasn't a villain. And he couldn't be all bad, of course, because there was redemptive moments all around in this movie. And I guessed that he would use his last kind of watch time slide to go back and save Deadpool. As I've said before, even though this was a very predictable story for me, I do think that it was better and deeper than the story in the first movie. Although, as I also mentioned in my non-spoilers review, part of me really feels bad for feeling that way because the first one was the origin, and I kind of feel like the original should have sort of that little happy place in your heart. But I do think that this one was better executed and better written. I'm so glad that they didn't do what I thought they were going to do, which was try and, for some ridiculous reason, make Cable Deadpool's father. They were talking about Deadpool's father in the beginning of this movie, and I was like, oh my god, it's gonna come. Cable's gonna miraculously be his father. Like, there's even kind of a slight resemblance that Deadpool and Cable have. So I was like, please, please don't do that. Please don't be so predictable. Give me some kind of like break out of the mold somehow. Please just break away from it. And thank God they didn't do that. I was also surprised to see what I just thought would be sort of a minor segue with Fire Fist turn into the main story arc for the entire movie. They touched on the role of the kid and the trailers, but they really hid just how central to the movie that character was, and I thought that was a very, very interesting thing. I mean, I got super Terminator vibes between Cable coming back in time and trying to kill this kid, but Deadpool does reference that, so we're kind of acknowledging that there's sort of a cross inspiration there somewhere. And I really, really appreciated that Cable wasn't a typical villain and that they didn't turn him fully villain, that they integrated the X-Force and it was a nod to that group from the Marvel comics. I also really appreciated that despite the levity and the huge amount of humor that there is in this story, that they really did address some deeper elements to human nature and to the dark side of Wade's powers. So Wade's powers, of course, enable him to completely regenerate constantly, but as it's touched on in the movie, it's due to cancerous growth that is kind of going unchecked in tumors, and he's got health issues with this. This film really explores the more difficult side of Wade's powers in that he cannot kill himself unless his powers are turned off, and then it's also addressing how people cope with loss, how people cope with despair and depression, and then it shows how he worked his way back from that. The depictions of his interactions with Vanessa in the afterlife were also very interesting. I always think it's interesting when you see a movie's interpretation of some kind of afterlife theory, and in this case it was Deadpool's version of the afterlife and how he interacted with Vanessa. At the end, when he was healed, as he kind of finally crossed through that barrier, I thought it was a great way for Ryan Reynolds to reassure himself that he actually is pretty. I mean, it's a great way of really illustrating that Deadpool was actually in the afterlife. The issue I had with this film is that there are a lot of inconsistencies, and there was some criticisms I had with how it was put together and how the story was written, particularly with what they did with some of the characters and what they did with some of the story. For example, I wish I knew more about Cable, and I think that the best comparison for this would be Thanos. We're talking about Marvel villains, and I knew his motivations as the kind of pseudo-villain and the initial antagonist in this story, but I didn't know any of his backstory. There was no real explanation of who he was. Oh my god, there I freaking go again. You gotta figure this out. Don't hit the freaking microphone. Oh my god. Anyway, I just wish there was more information on who Cable was, because if you have people that aren't as familiar with the comics and not someone who natively knows every universe and every story arc, I think this is the commonality shared with a lot of the people who make up the main audience for Marvel movies. And I will say, I think it's really great that people like for example, I love Star Wars, right? But not everybody has an in-depth knowledge of the Star Wars universe and of the characters, and not everybody loves the story enough or has the time perhaps to just dive into the extended world of the books and the comics. And I think because comics can be very intimidating to people because they are, at this point, I mean, it's decades, right? It's decades of backstory that people are missing and that they would have to kind of trace their steps back through. The majority of the Marvel audience, if we're just being honest with ourselves, do not have that back history or knowledge. If you're showing a character that is supposed to be recognized in the film, it's first of all, a great nod to the comics and the universe that it is trying to pay tribute to and depict in the movie. But B, you need to also consider the fact that a lot of your fan base may not know who this character is. And when you provide a villain that doesn't really have a backstory and you don't get who he is, you just know his motivations, like, okay, the future Fire Fist killed his family, that doesn't really tell me who Cable is. When people are watching this movie, you compare it to Thanos. Thanos is a character incredibly well done. You get backstory, you get motivation, you get full development, you get humanity, he's an alien, you guys know what I'm saying. You get a full personality, you get the depth of emotions. It was very well developed. This movie, unfortunately, covered the motivations, and you get some emotionality with Cable because you see he gives Deadpool that 30 seconds to go talk to the kid, gives him that chance, he goes back and he saves Deadpool at the end. You've got some emotionality there, but you don't get the backstory other than a quick touch on, oh, he's just a soldier from the future. Look, he happens to have some kind of cyborg tendencies and traits to him. He was a soldier, but you don't really get to see who he is. And even though despite that, he ended up being my second favorite character in this movie, second to Domino, of course. I loved Domino. And as a quick side note, even though he didn't look exactly like the comics version of him, I really, really enjoyed how they interpreted Cable. I think that it is possible to enjoy a movie and to enjoy the original character and the original work. I appreciate both, that you can enjoy both at the same time. Although I will say, I'm going to concede this, that a lot of the characters in this movie that were brought in are definitely altered from their portrayals in the original Marvel comics. I'm not going to deny that. So I will say that I can see that if you are a die-hard Marvel purist, I am sorry to say will not be happy, and I'm guessing you are not happy with how these characters are portrayed in this movie. Fire Fist is different origin story, different characterization. Domino doesn't quite look like what she does in the comics. Cable doesn't quite look like what he looks like in the comics. Although I want to say, and I'm going to be very honest, I like what they did with Domino's appearance, because in the comics, she has very chalky white, and then she's got the black patch kind of over her eye. And in this version, it's the reverse. So she is African American and she's got white around the patch of her eye. And I thought that that was a really, really interesting kind of take and reversal. And I personally really liked it. I understand that if you're a Marvel purist, you may not like that they did a sort of departure from her original appearance. I really enjoyed that they did a negative color scheme with her. And like I said, I really loved the character of Domino. So regardless, she ended up being my favorite character. As a side note, even though he doesn't look exactly like the comic version, I want to say that I loved Josh Brolin's portrayal of Cable. Something I really dug, really dug, was his efficient, no moves wasted, calculated fighting style. Every action scene with Cable, there was no movement wasted and it was just fast and dirty. It's always enjoyable to see beautifully choreographed fight scenes and like the flashy fighting style with skill that Deadpool has with his katanas, but something about the cold brutality of the way that they had Cable fight really stuck with me and I loved it. Something I mentioned in the non-spoilers review was that I had some issues with the amount and some of the types of humor that was shown in this movie. And I want to talk more about why that is. At least one moment that I'm certain was supposed to be funny just seemed really... I think the best way I can describe it is if you took Three Stooges and their very obvious physical humor and then you just mated it with Jackass. That's how a lot of the humor felt to me, and a lot of it felt out of place. The end scene where they defeated Juggernaut by plugging a cable into his butt and electrocuting him, like that was just... I know it was supposed to be funny, and if you found it funny, bear in mind, this is just my opinion, but for me, I was kind of like... There were a few kind of eye-bulging jokes about like racism and pedophilia in this movie that went a little too far, and I appreciate the humor of the movie overall, but there were some things I think that just weren't needed. And there was a lot of moments where, again, I felt like the movie was saying, this is funny, you should be laughing. And everyone in the theater, and I had a very interactive theater, I mentioned people were dressed up as Deadpool. Everyone in the theater was just like, crickets, chirp, chirp. So there's just, it felt like, I don't know, it was just, it was too much. Although I do need to give credit where credit is due. The entire way through the movie, Deadpool 2 poked fun about social justice warriors and other topics that I think we've all heard at this point are considered to be triggering or sensitive topics, and they can be very sensitive for a lot of people. But at the same time that they made fun of a lot of that, the movie had an incredibly diverse cast, gender, in terms of sexuality, in terms of storyline, in terms of acceptance of people's different sizes and different backgrounds and lifestyles. I feel kind of dorky for saying this, but they also really explored like the meanings of family and sticking up for each other and doing the right thing even when it's not the most popular thing. And I give them kudos because in my opinion, that is how it should be done. It shouldn't be something that one feels or that a studio feels you need to get up on a soapbox or grandstand about. It should be included naturally. And I think that they did so, and they did a really good job of doing that in this movie at the same time while mocking it, which is a very funny dichotomy, and it perfectly fits the character of Deadpool. One thing I also love about this movie are the freaking cameos. Hilarious. I loved the X-Force cameos. Brad Pitt showing up as he got electrocuted was freaking hilarious. I loved seeing Terry Crews showed up, and I didn't even recognize creepy Skarsgård as Zeitgeist. Did not even recognize him. I was like, afterward, I realized it was him, and I was like, oh my god, that was Skarsgård. And then, did any of you catch this? I didn't catch this. I actually found out about this afterward. Did you guys know Matt Damon was one of the rednecks in the truck? I didn't even catch that. And I found out and I was like, holy shit, that was Matt Damon? And I love that Matt Damon has just started to pull like a Stan Lee and just make these random AF cameos throughout the Marvel movies. Like, I seriously hope that this is a thing that continues because it's hilarious to me. The one cameo I was looking for that I missed was Stan Lee. He wasn't there. He was the statue that got knocked over as Deadpool motored through the X-Men and their mansion, and I really, really liked how the X-Men were in the background of that scene, and he was like, where are they? You don't think the studio can cough up the budget for extra characters? And you actually see the actors of those characters in the room, and they were just like, oh god, not this guy again. They just kind of shut him out. They're like, we're not dealing with this dude right now. There's a lot of moments like that where the humor does work very well, and I really enjoyed seeing them. I'm assuming at this point there's gonna be a third one. There's a glimpse that you get of Juggernaut kind of crawling his way out of the pool at the end, and they have that Juggernaut song at the very end of the post-credit scenes and kind of Easter eggs that they include. I can only assume that it's going to be coming. Juggernaut's going to feature very prominently, especially with all the references to Fool, you let out Juggernaut and now he's loose on the world, and what are we gonna do? Now, let's address a major issue I had with this movie. I did like that Deadpool 2 bucked tradition, and it didn't end with the stereotypical big bad guy battle and fight that a lot of these movies do. It actually ended with exploring Cable's decision to stay in this timeline. It ended with Deadpool having like his death moment and kind of, you know, his redemption and Fire Fist's redemption. But what I don't understand is how Wade knew Cable had gone back in time and saved him. If he had gone back in time and Wade knew that, how did they progress through the same sequence of events? And it wasn't until Wade grabbed the coin that it clicked for him that Cable had done that. That doesn't make sense to me. My first thought is it's because Wade actually died and that like froze his memories permanently in place, so he was able to connect the dots. But if that's the case, again, when Cable went back the first time, why wouldn't he have noticed and called him out on what was happening? And that doesn't make sense to me. Like, this just seems like a weird loophole, and I feel like anytime a movie addresses time travel, there are always loopholes and problems that they have to address, and this is one that just didn't make sense to me, and this was a huge plot hole for me personally. The other thing I really didn't like is because Cable stayed and Deadpool got his hands on the time-traveling device and he had Negasonic Jungle Storm and Yukio fix it, I feel like Vanessa's death and the character transformation that Deadpool had were cheapened by this. I feel like it lost its significance, and we got to the end and I was like, oh, he just brought her back. what was the point? What was the point of all of that? It really took away from all of the character development that I felt that he had. Like, it cheapened it for me. And fine, it's great that she lived and Deadpool gets to keep his love and it's, you know, happy ending and etc. But it really did take away from the meaning of the entire movie, and it kind of ruined it for me. I've got to admit, like, my favorite part of him going back in time, honestly, was when he had the choice to save all of the X-Force members. He only saved Sugar Bear. Like, he didn't go back and prevent all of them from dying by not parachuting when there was a wind advisory. He didn't do that. He went back and he saved Peter, aka Sugar Bear. I definitely enjoy this movie, although, I mean, it's flawed, but then again, a lot of movies are flawed, and for what it is, I enjoy Deadpool 2, and I like it a lot. I do like it better than the first one. I would definitely be interested to see what direction they travel in with the third movie, since at this point, I think I would pretty much put money on the fact that a third one is going to happen. I think that my favorite scene and moment in this movie has to be the armored convoy fight. What was your favorite part? Or conversely, what was it about this movie that didn't quite make it for you? Like, what was missing? What could they have done to have gone the extra step to get it to another level? You should tell me in the comments below, because I do read all of the comments. Don't forget, you can hang out with me live and connect with the Twitch community. We're on twitch.tv/travelerswarden, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And thank you so much to my Patreon supporters. You guys are amazing, and I love you all so much and appreciate you so much. Don't forget, tell me what your thoughts are on Deadpool 2. Next week, we're going to be seeing Solo. Pity me. I mean, I'm kind of like, about Solo. We'll find out. We'll see how it goes. I hope you guys are having an amazing one, and I will catch you later.